Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. Thanks for joining us. I'm Peter Ndoro and this is what's coming up on the show. In our final instalment of conversations with political parties about their relationship with the media, we sit down with newcomers that have emerged to contest the polls for the first time this year. We'll hear what their thoughts are about South Africa's media and how they feel about the coverage that they've been getting, or not getting as some of them may feel, as the new kids on the block. We'll also take a look at ethics and journalism after a lead story in one of last week's Sunday papers was penned by a journalist talking about his own book. Did the paper cross the line? That's the question we'll be pondering. These are some of the stories that we'll be tackling on the show, but first let's take a look at what's on the front pages of your Sunday newspapers this morning. We start with the Sunday Times, and this week is leading with a story about former President Jacob Zuma and how he allegedly hid about 422 million rand on behalf of the late Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. Now, the cash was apparently stored at Zuma's Nkandla residence before it was secretly moved to Eswatini earlier this year. President Ramaphosa is said to have been alerted about the cash pile about 2 months ago. Now, the city press has focused on what the paper says is a proxy fight for control of the SAPS between the Police Minister Bheki Cele and the National Commissioner Ketla Sithole after they butt heads apparently over a senior officer's axing. Sithole apparently suspended one of his 5 deputies, General Christine Magwenya, for allegedly using her position to help her son get a learner's license at a police driving school. Moving to the Sunday Independent, their headline story focuses on EFF accusations that ANC politicians are using the Public Investment Corporation to enrich themselves and settle political personal vendettas. This comes after businessman Dr. Iqbal Survey said that former PIC chairman Mondli Gungubele told him that he would crush his business. And on the front page of the Sunday Tribune, their top story says experts believe police lack the training and equipment to deal with violent protests. This after no arrests have been made following the violence between locals and foreign nationals 2 weeks ago that saw 4 people killed, hundreds displaced and shops looted. An expert is quoted as saying that there has been a general deterioration in policing over much of the past decade. And finally, the Weekend Argus is headlining with a story that describes police in action after a driver was captured 2 weeks ago on dashboard camera footage smashing into a road worker on the N2. The family from Kimberley that recorded the chilling footage say that the Western Cape Police still haven't reached out to them for the video evidence. It's time now to continue with our conversation about the relationship between political parties and the media. This at a time when a number of new parties have contributed to a record list of political players contesting the May general elections. There'll be 48 parties appearing on the national ballot this year, 19 more than those registered in 2014. And we meet 3 of these new parties shortly. But first, one of them, the African Content Movement, took the SABC to court yesterday, demanding the public broadcaster cover their manifesto launch live. The case was dismissed with costs. And this was the view of the South African National Editors Forum, SANEF, on the issue.
SANEF members are still discussing the issue because obviously it's just news has just come through. But our initial response is that this was a frivolous case, obviously the SABC needs to cover all political parties equitably, the issue is that the African Content Movement is a tiny new party, and to spend resources on covering its launch live would just simply wouldn't have made sense.
Well, so many of the political parties will have complaints, especially now, and as much as we're getting closer to the elections. How do we guard against that sort of perception that some political parties are not being treated fairly, which of course we'll hear a lot of, and how are we guarding some of the journalists and the media houses at large about this?
Look, I mean, I think the legislation regulations are very clear about it. It's about equitable coverage. So obviously those parties that, have proved themselves, have, the majority of people who have voted for them will get more coverage than other parties. And, newcomers, they will get, obviously will get some coverage because they need to be in order to have the chance of actually being voted for. But the issue, which I think is very clear in all the legislation, is around equitable coverage. And it's, so the big parties will get more coverage, and I think that's fair.
So that's SANEF's view on how the media should cover new political parties equitably. Well, let's find out what these new parties think about that. And today we have representatives from the African Content Movement, African Transformation Movement and Black First, Land First Party. Thanks very much indeed for joining us. Welcome to you. Let me start by welcoming you, Romeo Ramuada, Secretary General of the African Content Movement, ACM. Welcome to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Peter, for welcoming the most progressive party that is going to shock many people, the African Content Movement in the House. You
sound just like your boss. Next to you, welcome to the President of the African Transformation Movement, Violwetu Zungula. Thanks for joining us. Welcome.
Hello, and greetings to the viewers as well.
And from the BLF, the Black First, Land First Party, Lindsay Marsdorp, welcome to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Peter, and hi to the viewers as well.
All right, so Kate Skinner, SANEF, National Editors Forum, South African National Editors Forum, says that, look, smaller parties are not going to get as much coverage as the bigger parties. Is that fair? What's your thought?
No, I think Kate Skinner is out of order. Basically, who is small to who? We as the SM was saying, which one is the big party? I mean, because we can't say some parties are small. Who is small to who here? Because we're all political parties which are fighting for the space. And if you remember, the same South African National Editors Forum is the same institution that was actually against our president when he introduced 90% local content. That's why in the ACM manifesto, one of the issues that we are going to transform, we're saying, as we're fighting for 90% ownership, we want the 90% ownership of the media by South Africans. Because one of the biggest challenges in this country is that the media is controlled somewhere else, and they want to cover certain parties. They call some parties the big three. Who said it's the big three?
Okay, we'll talk about the actual nitty-gritties of it, but you're saying that she's out of order. You should, because they're not in a position to measure who is big and who is not.
Yeah.
Do you share the same view as the ATM?
Yes, particularly because the elections are yet to take place. Now, for a party that is contesting for the first time, how do you measure whether it's small or big? Now, you could perhaps have that understanding for parties that have contested before. And perhaps one thing that we need to change, it's not small parties, it is parties contesting for the first time. That should be the categorization of these new parties, not small parties.
All right, so BLF, you've been around a little bit longer than these other two. But this is the first time you're contesting as a party, and I just wonder how you feel about the idea that newer parties should get smaller coverage than the bigger ones,
thanks,
or the
Peter.
Ones that have been established.
And thanks for noting that. We're 4 years old now. I think there's not been an organization, an entity, a revolutionary organization that has garnered the space, the political space as BLF has done. No one has burst onto the scene as BLF has done. We fought white monopoly capital single-handedly in this country, defended radical economic transformation. And it is a fact, SANEF led a case against BLF, and our president has a suspended sentence hanging over his head currently. We have exposed the media as biased, as controlled by white monopoly capital. We have shown that they are agents of Stratcom. And we've shown that, and this is a simple example. Last year, ANC and EFF had agreed to expropriate land without compensation. It is more than 1 year later. Parliament is closed, and they have not done it. Where is the journalists? Where are the media who's showing the nation that these two political organizations, which you regard as the big organizations that represent the oppressed, where is the media to show that these people have lied? BLF has constantly said they have lied. In fact, SABC was not even there to cover our manifesto launch, our battle plan launch yesterday. It shows that the media is biased. It only wants to construct a narrative of white monopoly capital, and it wants to engineer a process where we have parties like the EFF, the ANC, and the DA coming together and controlling the electoral process. So you're suggesting that
the SABC is captured by white monopoly capital?
Yeah. I'm saying that the
SABC is captured. I mean, Peter, for example...
So why did you take the SABC to court yesterday?
No, we took the SABC to court because we are saying as the ACM, when we go to pay the registration fees at the IEC, they don't say you are a new party, you must pay 300,000 if you want to contest national. They are saying we're paying the same money that the ANC is paying. We're paying the same money the so-called big three they are paying. So we are saying we must be treated equal because we've got the same members. As he has said that nobody has proven our membership because you see, we went around the country, we've been engaging South Africans. We're saying the SABC, it must serve all South Africans equally because at the end of the day, the members of the ACM, they deserve to see themselves on the television because they're paying TV.
But did you go to the right place? Surely you should have gone to the IEC and said, look, the SABC is not playing fair.
No, we feel that we went to the right place because first of all, we as the ACM, as I said, we are pushing 90% ownership and also we are pushing 90% ownership of the media. We are going to go to the ICASA. If you read the judgment, the judge said one of the institutions is not available as well. It's one of the key issues. So we are saying that ICASA itself is corrupt. It must be transformed and start to reflect the country where South Africans are living at.
All right. ATM, you've been around quite a bit now. We've even interviewed you on the show here. And I just wonder, do you feel happy with the way that you've been covered, that your story is being told fairly?
No. Look, as ATM, we formally registered June last year, had launches from September. We only got media coverage mid-January, only when Mr. Manyi joined. Now, that creates an impression that it is a new party. And I would understand if the private media houses were to use that, for example, they want to sell papers and all of that. But for the state broadcaster, it should be a matter of what is in the public's interest. It should not be about individuals or sensation because, for example, Good has more political, more coverage more than us, whereas Good was only formed recently. Same with ACM. They were formed recently, but ATM has been here since June last year, but the media coverage has not been what it should have been.
Is it because you invited the media and they refused to come? Or
we've been inviting the media for our launches. I remember one of the launches in the Eastern Cape, the SABC radio was there. But if you check the attendance as well as the support warranted that it should make television news, and it did not. So what we're saying as the ATM is that the state broadcaster must act in the best interest of the public because they are the ones who are supposed to protect democracy by exposing the public on the views of these new political parties.
All right. So there are 48 political parties contesting on a national level, and I think on local level it could be as much as 312. It is not possible to cover all those parties. So doesn't it make sense to say, let's base it on what we know for sure, and that's representation in Parliament?
Well, and firstly, I think that would be completely incorrect in this sense. You know, the biggest voter after the biggest collector after the ANC is the non-voter. So the notions of big parties must also be brought into question. Why are people not voting? We believe as BLF, the people of this country are tired of a sellout proposition that means that the land belongs to white people, 80% still. We put ourselves out and say we're going to take back the land in the interest of black people. This is a new proposition. We believe that the majority of this country, the black oppressed, believe in BLF because we believe that the land must be returned. So the proposition that the SABC plays is incorrect. And another thing that we must say is that the SABC, we've written countless letters to the SABC. We've engaged editors and journalists broadly across this country. And we continuously get told you don't have we didn't apply soon enough. So we send those letters 1 week, 2 weeks before the time. They don't avail any of their journalists. No one comes out. Now I want to make, there's a point that we must make about Hangweg that happened the other day, where in that moment in Hangberg, when you were doing your news coverage, there was two parties that were fighting, the Land Party and the EFF Party. Your headlines then come, BLF, Land Party and EFF are fighting. This is incorrect. BLF was there. Our BLF chairperson of the Western Cape, Ngadisa Mpemnyama, was on the floor. He then spoke to both parties publicly and said, peace amongst blacks, war against the enemy. The SABC does not write, BLF intervenes in EFF and Land Party fight to stop black violence. No, it says BLF, EFF and Land Party fighting. What? This is bias, it is unjust, and it continues to position BLF as some crazy organization who just wants violence. And it's done perpetually to make sure that the voters don't understand who we are.
You've spoken about the SABC, all of you, but what about the rest of the media? There's radio and there's newspapers as well. Is it the same in your view?
Yeah, no, I think, Peter, just maybe to touch a bit on the issue I was raising. You know, like when you talk about the big three parties or the parties represented in parliament, people are rejecting these parties. That's why they're joining other parties. You see all our parties, when we run rallies, people are there. So why are you denying the people to see their parties that they love to appear on TV? So as we are talking about other media as well, I mean, there is this other one called ETV, the most corrupt one that doesn't want to cover other parties except ANC, EFF, because they threaten them, they want to cover them. So we as the ACM were feeling South African media, it needs to reflect the community where the people are living. If you talk about the radios, it's the same thing. And you see, for example, our president has been changing the lives of the people. He brought 90% local content. The same media houses, they were against this.
Bankrupted the SABC.
No, he didn't bankrupt the SABC. When he left the SABC, he left the SABC with money. And the people who came now, they don't understand broadcasting. Those are the same people, they spend the money recklessly, and now when the money is finished,
you do know that you can have R1 billion in the bank and still be bankrupt. You know that, don't you?
No. Mara, you can't blame a man who's gone. Because at the end of the day, if you, Peter, you were presenting, because we are a good presenter and we support you as our black brother as well. And I'm saying, if you're presenting your show very well, somebody comes here and mess up the show. Is it Peter?
All right.
No, let's be fair. I mean, the president of the ACM is very clear.
We're running out of time, so I want to push us on along a little bit. What are your expectations in these last few weeks going forward to ATM?
Please give time to the parties contesting for the first time. Reason why, like you said when the show started, there's a record 48 new parties. There has to be something that prompted these new parties to be registered. Now, politics is all about perception. If the media creates a perception that there are only 3 parties in South Africa, then that is not good for democracy. Fine, there's a lot of parties, but still, there's a lot of parties that are working, that are changing people's lives, and that are bringing new ideas, because what we need in the country, it's new ideas as to how we can solve our problems. Now, those new ideas, they might not come from these so-called 3 big parties. They will come from even new parties.
All right, so before the show started, I asked you to tell me how many members you have in your party. None of you could tell me. Lindsay, how can we give you airtime based on an unknown number? You could you could have only 40 members for all we know.
Well, firstly, let me say categorically, as I said to you, every black person is a member of BLF. Why? We are black and we want land. We are the oppressed. They just don't know. You must scratch. It's black consciousness. White consciousness, white people and white monopoly capital has used media to whiten us. We as BLF are doing the reverse. Yesterday we had a manifesto, a black battle plan launch. If you were there, if SABC covered it thoroughly, you'd have seen people come out. First you said we were 5 people. Then you started saying we're 25 people. Now you're saying we're 5,000 people. You don't even realize what you are saying. It changes the numbers all the time. What we are saying is come out, come and see us come together, and come and see the policies and ideas that we put forward. And I want to take this opportunity to thank our people. Our people have put money. Our people have come out in numbers. Our people have said they're going to take BLF to Parliament. I want to warn the SABC, I want to warn all media houses. There is nothing that is going to stop us from going to Parliament, and there's nothing that's going to stop us from taking the land. We will expose the ANC, we will expose the EFF for selling out on the land question. And BLF will tell our people that they have sold out and ensure that the land is returned, and we become the black radical voice in Parliament.
Yeah, Peter, I can tell you that from the African Content Movement's point, every South African is a member of the ACM, including yourselves and all these colleagues who are working.
A member of both parties.
Yeah, because look, everybody wants to own. There's nobody. South Africa, 90% of South Africans are landless. They don't own anything. Who will support a party which is saying we want 90% ownership of every sector of the economy? We cannot keep being like visitors in our own country. So I'm saying South Africans are very clear they're supporting the ACM. And as the ACM, we are saying to South Africans, you must be very clear, vote for action. And we're saying we're not going to deliver after 5 years. Who knows who's going to be there in 5 years? We're saying 6 months. Give us 6 months. You cannot turn around the economy, you cannot fix water. Jobs. People want water now. People want to eat now, not in the next 5 years or what. Final
word to you, ATM.
Our members, remember, most of these new parties, for example, ATM is a self-funding party. It does not have the resources to hire auditors and so forth. Therefore, we gauge our support based on the attendance on our rallies. I can tell you now, there's plus minus 500 religious organizations that are supportive of the ATM, 30 political parties that are not contesting the elections and will be supporting the ATM. Today we'll be having a rally for Gauteng in Atteridgeville, Lucas Moripe Stadium. It's a stadium. That should tell you, because there are some political parties that barely fill what we call a hall, but us as the ATM will be having our rally in a stadium. That should tell you that we are worth getting the coverage that we deserve. And most importantly, we are not led by politicians, and we are not just recycling politicians. The ATM is led by ordinary citizens who want to genuinely bring change in our country. Okay. So this people's movement should actually have the eyes and ears of SABC.
So right. Maybe just one thing.
All right, we've run out of time, unfortunately, but we will bring you back, I promise you, before the end of the election cycle. Romeo Ramada, Violeta Zungula and Lindsay Marsdop, thanks very much indeed for joining us and giving us your views. And the SABC were the ones that brought you on air. Come on, give us some props.
No, thank you.
All right, okay, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll start to explore ethics in journalism. Stay with us. Right, welcome back, and I'm going to tell you there's quite a lot that's been happening this past week, and your Sunday papers are full of stuff, and we're going to start looking at those in a couple of minutes with my new guests that have just joined us, my guest editors for today. In fact, let's just introduce them very quickly before we get into our digital package. And we say good morning to Ashton McKenzie, editor of the Rosebank Killarney Gazette and Santon Chronicle.
Yes, good morning.
Welcome to you. I get one of your papers. I'm not going to tell people where I live. And my other guest, Mzwandile Khati, editor, Sowetan Urban. Thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much.
All right, okay, we're going to chat about papers and also what you guys have been writing about, particularly as we get to the elections just now. But first, let's take a look. In fact, let's do that now, right? The first thing is, I guess, even before we look at the papers, I want to know, in terms of election coverage, we've just heard from the smaller parties, the newer parties, saying that media is not playing fair, that you are not giving them the print space that they deserve. What's been your policy? How have you worked out how you're going to do the coverage of these parties?
I think within the editors forum that we have, especially at Caxton Joburg North, we've been very fair in terms of giving editorial to all parties, but have very much tried to stay within the community realm. So what we've started is a hashtag I made my mark, and to really put a face on elections, and not so much just about the politicians, but more so about how we can promote elections and get the youth involved and really get the community to embrace a change in South Africa and to be part of their governance.
Right. So if the IEC came and had a look at your paper and said, what formula have you applied to giving fair coverage? Is there a way that you can say, this is what we did based on XYZ?
Like she had said, our focus is mainly on the people, giving voice to the people and also encouraging them to
So they're telling you what they feel and what they think.
Yes.
Right.
Rather than focusing on political parties, because, I mean, let's face it, I don't think we'll have enough space and time to cover all of them.
It's 48.
So what we do with the hashtag I've made my mark campaign is that we focus on the people, encourage them to take part in this democracy by voting, also encouraging them to sort of like share their stories, not just about these elections, but from the start of, I mean, since 1994 up until now, and also educate them, really. That is our focus.
Have you been able to gauge what the readers are thinking, saying, and are expecting? I've just heard from Lindsay Marsdorp, who says that the second largest, biggest party are the non-voters, actually, which is quite scary.
I mean, we've been to a couple of communities and a couple of schools and really try to get the female voice out there as well. But what we've come across is a lot of people saying, I think we've discussed it before, is they just don't want to vote anymore. They feel like there's no party that resonates with them, and they don't want to waste their vote, which is a little bit disappointing, because you can't really have a say in how things are run unless you make your mark.
Yeah. Soweto, historically, historically ANC, and biggest conglomeration of black Africans in the urban setting. What's the feeling in there in your papers? What are you getting a sense that, is it closer than it's ever been before, or is this still a stronghold of the governing party?
Even though it's still a stronghold for the governing party, but I think we are getting a sense of more young people getting interested in politics. I think we can credit that to the emergence of the EFF and also BLF as well. I mean, I've heard them talking about black consciousness. So we have a lot of those things going on in Soweto right now. Yes, it's still a stronghold for the ANC, as it still governs a lot of what's there, but currently, I mean, moving towards these elections, I think there's a lot of interest amongst the youth to vote, yes.
So one of the stories that we're going to be looking at shortly, and we're hoping to get a commentator, columnist, Gareth Van Onselen on the line shortly. But he wrote about last week's headline story in the Sunday Times, and in there we have Peter Louis Myburgh writes a story about his book, and he calls it Sensational New Book Claims. And when you read it, it sounds as if he's writing about somebody else's book, but it turns out it's his. And I just wonder, did you guys cover the story of the book?
Well, in my papers, we haven't covered the story of the book. Normally, for books, it would be a book launch, but what was quite interesting was that one of the businessmen that were actually murdered that he wrote about in that book happened in Sandton, and he asked us if we could use some of the pictures of ours. So we didn't cover the book launch, but there always are gatekeeping processes for people writing about their own.
So what's the rationale in terms of you not covering it? We had 3 major newspapers last week that did it, and you didn't do it at a community level.
I don't think the story was at our level, but also as an editor and also as a media practitioner, I think for me, I was going to take a lot of caution publishing a story like that on the front page, especially in Soweto, because it sort of like represented itself as a breaking news story, where else it's just a book launch or a book review or an extract from a book. So when it comes to those things, we are very careful not to confuse our people. I mean, because it might not be the same as with the big newspapers than us.
All right, let's talk a little bit about ethics and journalism. I mean, you sit as editors, and these must be questions that you face every single day, literally. And a keen reporter arrives and says, look, I've got this story. How do you navigate the world of ethics as editors?
Well, I mean, I think that's something that should be most important is media ethics, and it is the first thing we train our newbie and excited journalists when they come into our newsroom, is what is ethical in what you cover. And we always have fact checks. It comes through to the editors, then to the sub-editors, and back again. So regardless on what the story is, even when people send us letters or want to publish their own stories, we make sure that we give whoever's in there the right of reply. And well, I mean, that's what we do every day. We fact check, and we give everyone sort of the opportunity to write something that is non-biased. But I think him writing his article as a journalist, I think we're sort of in two spaces, and we sit on two sides of the room. It's either we trust journalists because we are journalists, or are we biased because we are journalists, and we just automatically trust what they have to say. But I think, especially in that context, if we had to do it, there'd be a massive array of checking that goes on before that article is published.
Yeah, and I guess it is a difficult one. I mean, Peter Ndoro is saying that, look, perhaps the story is much bigger than the discussion that we're having about whether he should have written the article or not.
I think the most important thing is fact-checking, like she has just said. Because now, I mean, for me, the problem is presenting something as a lead story in the biggest newspaper in the country, which might appear as a breaking news story, whereas it's not, but it's just about the book. So I think, for me, that's where the confusion is.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. Look, it sounds as if we might have Gareth van Onselen on the line now. So let's try and get him and get his thoughts, because he was the first one that really kind of highlighted this disjuncture, whatever you want to call it. Gareth, thanks very much for joining us, and welcome to the program. I know that you work at the IRR, but you're also a columnist with the Business Day. So you had concerns about Peter Ndoro writing a story about his book, this expose on Esmachashule. What were the concerns that sort of came out for you?
Hi, Peter. Well, thanks very much for having me on the show. Yes, so basically my primary concern was that Peter Ndoro, who I think is a really outstanding journalist in his own right, had written the front-page news story for the Sunday Times on his own book. Now, that's a problem, because if you're a journalist, you cannot write, and you are the news. In other words, the news is your own book. You can't objectively write a hard news story on that. It needs to be written by a third party. And it's not necessarily your own fault. You could have the best intentions. You could be a very good journalist, as Peter Ndoro is. But you make mistakes when you're reporting on your own work that are, occur on many different levels. And it's the newspaper's job to vet those opinions, to vet the evidence that you say, and to present it to the public as, fact-checked and objective.
All right, so I think one of the things that maybe alarmed some people was the way he wrote things like claims in a sensational new book, as if he was writing about another author, another person. Had he not written that, and had he written saying, this is what I found out in my investigations, which I've highlighted in my book, would it have been different for you?
Yes, well, I think there are two ways of approaching the problem. The one is to present an extract from the book, which is often done in the opinion or editorial pages of the newspaper, which are not hard news, objective newspapers. They're there for opinions. Another one was to do it the way that you suggested, but then to have an accompanying story from the Sunday Times, which says, this is an extract from this book. We've looked at what the book contains. We've double-checked with the sources in the book. We've checked these facts and data, and we believe this is an accurate or inaccurate story, so that the public can see a third-party examination of what's being said.
All right, so you did something interesting. You went onto Twitter and you asked people what they thought. What did you find?
Well, actually, Peter Ndoro, to his credit, responded to me on Twitter and said that, he did acknowledge that he'd helped the Sunday Times write their front-page story, and there was possibly something that he should look at there. But, yeah, most people were very open to the criticism. I think it's something they haven't thought of, and what happens is you get caught up in the sensation of the story, and you forget to look at how it was constructed and whether best practice was followed in presenting it to the public. So people are, I think appreciate those kind of insights. And I got some good feedback.
I mean, I read that thread, and I think what you were trying to point out to Peter as you were discussing with him was that the two are not the same. The story is important, but the issues of ethics is also important.
Yes, correct. And so what happens is, you get a very big, very important, very sensational story, but there were a few best practice measures that I don't think the Sunday Times followed. But the public then worries that those will detract from the importance of the story, and so they tend to go, that stuff's not important compared to the actual news. But you have to appreciate that these are two different stories. They're not necessarily the same. The one is a comment on journalism and best practice, and the other one, of course, is a comment on big problems facing the country. They can both coexist, and you can address them in different ways, but I don't think you should ignore the one at the expense of the other.
All right. So you also said that this isn't the first time this has happened, and that maybe there's a bigger agenda at play here?
Well, it's the second time that the Sunday Times have done this. They allowed Jacques Poe, who also would write sentences like, an amazing new sensational book, this is disclosed, about his own book, The President's Keepers. And I think one of the problems why this is happening is that newspapers are, chasing headlines, so they've got the book exclusively and they're very worried that other newspapers will write it. They don't have the resources or the expertise to vet that book before it will break in another newspaper. And so they simply outsource the front page to the author. And that's where problems can creep in, because as I say, it's the reason why you get your work proofread, or you don't allow Cyril Ramaphosa to write the news story on his own State of the Nation address, because people make mistakes, they get facts wrong, and you need a third party to be able to check that stuff.
All right. And what about the argument that the story is so big that perhaps we are getting sidetracked with these ethics questions?
Yes, well, that goes to the earlier point that I made. I think you can raise both concerns, and that they're not morally equivalent. I'm not by any means suggesting that, the Sunday Times allowing an author to write a story on his own book is anywhere the same scale as the allegations in Peter Louis Maiber's book. There's different universes and different problems, and the one the Sunday Times editorial staff need to look at, the other one, who knows, the National Prosecuting Authority needs to look at. So these are big, different problems, but they are both problems, and you can't ignore the one at the expense of the other.
All right. Gareth, thanks very much indeed for talking to us, and interesting talking point. And I think one that as readers we should always think about who's writing this and what are they saying to us. Thanks so much indeed for your time.
Thank you.
All right, so that was columnist Gareth van Onselen speaking to us on the line about the ethics sometimes he feels gets crossed when writing these articles. So let me come back to you now. Final thoughts on that story. You've heard from Gareth. He pretty much shared what you were thinking. And I just wonder, has there been a shift, do you think, in journalism with the introduction of social media and so on and so forth, that some of these lines that used to be quite clear in the past are not so clear now, so that we quote Twitter without even checking what that person has written on Twitter? It's almost as an assumption, if that person's got a blue tick, it must be true. What are your thoughts?
We do use Twitter not necessarily as a source, but as a tip-off, as a starting point. Because I think in our newsroom we like to call a lot of social media users the keyboard warriors. So we definitely make sure that those sources have been vetted and checked before we use it within our hard news, within our news gathering. I think what we do with social media is use it more as a response source as opposed to an accurate source that we would use to validate or fact check a story.
All right. Final thought?
We are in the digital age, obviously, and these questions will always rise. I mean, not only because of social media. I mean, there's also a lot of fake news that is out there. So I think maybe, I don't know, maybe we will need to go back and do a review of this journalism code of ethics, because sometimes there is a clash. I mean, sometimes they get stories, we get stories, I mean, from social media, and then sometimes there's no fact checking and verifications and all those things. But I think we need to go back as media practitioners and maybe do a review of these ethics in relation to social media and, I mean, the time that you are living in, the digital age.
Very interesting conversation. Thanks so much indeed for giving us insights on this, but we'll continue to talk right after this break. We're going to pause for a moment, get your cup of tea and rush right back to your seat. We'll be back just now.
Complicated cases.
Your black friends might be running this country, but I'm still the government on Pataruk.
The poor child.
This kid was electrocuted by your fence.
Sorry, but his own fault.
I put it to you.
that you have a personal interest in this case?
Under Section 300 of the Criminal Procedures Act 51 of 1977.
I urge the court to find in favor of the plaintiff.
The court finds the accused guilty.
Dedicated lawyers dig to the bottom and everyone gets peace. It's a pleasing judgment and it's justice for all on SABC Anko, DSTV Channel 156.
It's all things gangster and power in the kingdom of Kwamashu as two families immerse in the contradictory world of church and crime. Uzalo, weekdays at 8:30 p.m. on SABC 1. Mzansi, for sure.
South Africa decides.
Sathi mabeze bazo-investa sakwazi ukuthi sa-raise 290 billion yamarandi.
An African perspective this week. We discuss the foreign policies of the main political parties in the country.
On the 8th of May, when we vote his government out of this town.
From Cairo to Cape Town, Madagascar to Morocco, we are one thing.
Join us on Wednesday at 9:30 p.m. on SABC News.
All right, so let's start wrapping up the program as we take a look at what's been on the front pages of the newspapers this weekend, and some of them pretty sensational. So let's start with you. What's the story and which paper grabbed your attention?
So there's a story on the City Press, the front page of the City Press.
City Press?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the story is about an alleged feud or misunderstanding, if I may put it that way, between the police commissioner and the minister. So for me, I think there is an issue for concern for South Africans, because I mean the South African police services, there's always been, I mean in recent years, there's always been sort of instabilities when it comes to management. Even this year or last year, provincially, the commissioner was suspended because there were allegations of corruption and all those things. So now we are seeing this story, the police minister and the commissioner.
But I suppose, I mean, what she's accused of is apparently she used her position as one of the deputies to get a learner's license for her son at a police driving school. Now, if that's true, then Ketla Stole has no choice but to suspend her until it's sorted. But the trick is they suggest that this woman was close to Bheki Cele, especially when he was commissioner. She was the chief of staff. And so he's caught between a rock and a hard place, I guess.
Yeah, so I mean, we have two issues here. Yeah. It's the issue of corruption with the learner's license and the issue of that power fights between the minister and the police commissioner.
What's also alarming is that if there's fights within the police, how do we expect our community to trust the police? So a part of the story is it's not just about the alleged misuse of power or ranks, but that is the story overshadowed by the feud within the police force? How do we expect them to
so it's a
govern
concern
us?
for us and faith and trust, but maybe we could say the top cop is suspending one of his deputies. Perhaps he's serious about dealing with corruption. Let's move to the Sunday Times, because, you know, I'm waking up every Sunday now and I can't believe half the stories that are on the front there. You can't even make this stuff up. $30 million apparently, allegedly, President Jacob Zuma stashed in a vault at Nkandla for Muammar Gaddafi, to get lawyers for him should he get captured. I don't know what your initial reaction is to this, but people, I think, are probably thinking, after last week we had Ace, before that we had something else. It's just a lot.
I think it's a century overload, especially as we were discussing before, just before elections. It's this constant hit after hit after hit that we keep having to take. My first reaction was, where did you keep that large amounts of money? But it's scary and it baffles. I think it's, like I said, a sensory overload for the community and for people to constantly have to be greeted by this every Sunday morning when you're supposed to be enjoying your
I don't
day.
want to be cynical, but does the timing concern you at all?
Well, obviously, I mean, you can't blame anyone for questioning the timing of these stories because you are going towards the elections. But also, we should be careful not to let the timing or questioning the timing overshadow the real story there. What if the story is true? I mean, should we be content? Should we just not focus on the story and focus on the timing because you're going to the elections?
All right, so I mean, there's going to be quite a lot that's going to come out this week, I guess. Today, interestingly, is Rwanda Genocide Memorial, 25 years later. It's a big story for Africa and a big story for the continent. And I just wonder, looking at the front pages, could there have been something there to talk about it? We missed Cyclone Idai quite a bit with the front pages of our newspapers. Could there have been something about Rwanda, even though it is an international story?
I think so, because Rwanda, I mean, for me, it's a good story of reconciliation and hope. I mean, just for the whole continent, obviously. If you can look at how far Rwanda has come since 1994 and the genocide, I mean, we should have expected something on the front pages, or if not even on the front page, maybe at least page 2 about that commemoration.
So it's that big of a story?
Yes.
They did launch it's the official opening of the Holocaust and Genocide Center there by Joburg Zoo, which really pays focus and puts emphasis on the genocides and such as the Holocaust. So I think it is being covered, but not necessarily as much as it should be. It's important, like you said, I think it's an important way to show how a country can come back from such devastation.
All right, so perhaps one of the other stories that's interesting for me is the Sunday Independent, if we can get that paper up, because there the EFF is accusing the ANC politicians, and they will do that, they will accuse each other, of using Public Investment Corporation to enrich themselves and settle political scores, and pointing a finger at a former PIC chairman, Deputy Finance Minister Mondli Ngungubele, saying that he would crush his business, Dr. Survey. So what I have to say straight off is that this paper is owned by Dr. Survey. So again, this whole thing of, am I using my paper to tell my story, or is this a story worthy of telling?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's different. It's difficult when, you know, you're trying to allegedly use your paper as your mouthpiece. But I think you mentioned it before, just because it's your paper, should the story not have been told, regardless. And I think there still are checks that are being put forward, or we hope that are being put forward, that stop anything sensationalist from coming through. I mean, it's always going to be politicians arguing with each other and pointing fingers completely.
Yeah, I think some of these things end up overshadowing the real story. I mean, now the owner of the newspaper is always in the newspaper, is always making headlines, and sometimes you get even journalists making headlines. So now I think maybe we need to go back and relook at the practice and the ethics and all those things to say, I mean, how do we move away from this thing of journalists making headlines? Because at the end of the day, and media owners making headlines, because at the end of the day, we run a risk of not paying enough attention to the real story because it's overshadowed by the fact that the owner is part of the story.
All right, perhaps as we start to conclude and look at the week ahead, what's likely going to be in your papers in the week ahead?
Well, judging by the past protests in Alex, they have threatened to shut down Sandton tomorrow, especially there by it's Grayson Drive off-ramp and on-ramp. So we'll definitely be covering that, because I think it's important. It's not just massively so for Sandton being the hub and the CBD of business, but the problems and the issues that the Alex community is facing really needs to be put forward before the political agenda has been attached to that.
Yeah.
So that's definitely something we'll be focusing on.
And Soweto and Urban?
This weekend there's been a commemoration of Solomon Mahlangu, but also specifically in Soweto where there was a commemoration of Charlotte Maxege. So that took place last week in Kliptown. So I think that's one of the biggest stories that we have this week in our papers and so it's, yeah.
Well, it's been great having you both on the show. Thank you so much for coming through. I look forward to chatting to you again. I think we don't spend enough time with community newspapers, so I'd love to do that a little bit more frequently. Thanks so much indeed for joining us and giving us your insights.
Thank you.
All right, and you at home, thanks very much indeed for watching our show, Media Monitor. We'll be back at the same time next week for more of the same. From me and the team, have a good day, everybody. Stay blessed.